the bright lights of the late-night television studio illuminated the stage as audience members settled into their seats, excited for what promised to be another entertaining evening. The atmosphere was energetic, with producers rushing behind the scenes and cameras gliding silently across the floor. Nobody expected that this particular night would become one of the most talked-about moments in recent television history. Carrie Underwood arrived at the studio with her usual grace and confidence. Known for her powerful voice, successful career, and warm personality, she was welcomed with enthusiastic applause as she stepped onto the stage. Smiling at the audience, she took her seat across from the host and prepared for what seemed like a routine interview. The conversation began comfortably. They discussed her latest projects, her family life, and the challenges of balancing a successful career with personal responsibilities. Carrie answered thoughtfully, sharing humorous stories from her life and expressing gratitude for the support she had received throughout her journey. The audience laughed often and the interview flowed naturally. As the discussion continued, the host shifted toward the topic of fame and public scrutiny. It was a subject Carrie had addressed before, but tonight the conversation felt slightly different. The host asked whether celebrities sometimes overreacted to criticism from the media and the public. Carrie smiled politely. "I think everyone handles criticism differently," she replied. "What affects one person may not affect another." The host nodded. "But don't you think public figures sometimes take things too personally?" A few audience members leaned forward in their seats. Carrie remained calm. "There's a difference between constructive criticism and unnecessary negativity," the host responded quickly. "Some people would say negativity is simply part of being famous." A subtle shift moved through the room. Carrie crossed her hands in her lap and paused before answering. "Being famous doesn't mean someone stops being human." The audience applauded. The host smiled but continued pressing the topic. "Still, many people face criticism every day without having the resources celebrities have." Carrie's expression became more serious. "Resources don't eliminate emotions." The room grew quieter. The audience could sense that the conversation was becoming more intense. The host challenged her point again. "Isn't dealing with public opinion part of the job description?" Carrie looked directly at him. "I accepted public attention when I chose this career. I didn't agree to be treated without respect." A wave of applause echoed through the studio. Behind the cameras, several producers exchanged nervous glances. What had begun as a casual discussion was evolving into a genuine debate. The host leaned forward. "Some viewers might argue that celebrities benefit from publicity when it's positive and object when it's negative." Carrie took a deep breath. "I understand that perspective, but positive attention and personal attacks are not the same thing." The audience remained completely focused. No one was checking phones. No one was whispering. Every eye was fixed on the stage. The tension continued building. The host referenced several examples of public controversies involving entertainers. Without mentioning specific incidents, he suggested that some celebrities were too sensitive to criticism. Carrie's tone remained controlled, but her words became more direct. "I think we've reached a point where people forget there's a real person behind every headline." Several audience members immediately applauded. The host responded. "And what about accountability?" Carrie nodded. "Accountability matters, absolutely, but accountability and cruelty are different things." The audience reacted again. For several moments, neither side seemed willing to back down. The discussion became the center of the entire show. Even crew members standing near the cameras appeared captivated by the exchange. The host asked whether social media had made the situation worse. Carrie laughed softly. "That's probably the easiest question you've asked tonight." The audience laughed with her. Then she explained how social media had transformed the relationship between public figures and audiences. Years ago, criticism was filtered through newspapers or television. Now it reaches people instantly, every hour of every day. The host listened carefully. For the first time during the discussion, he didn't interrupt. Carrie continued, "Sometimes people type things online that they would never say face-to-face." The audience nodded in agreement. The atmosphere gradually shifted. The debate was becoming less confrontational and more reflective. The host eventually admitted that social media had changed public conversations dramatically. Carrie smiled. "That's really all I'm saying. A sense of relief spread through the studio. The tension that had dominated the previous segment began to fade. One audience member shouted supportively, causing laughter throughout the room. The host joked that he wasn't expecting the interview to turn into a philosophical discussion. Carrie laughed. Neither was I. The audience applauded again. As the interview continued, both participants started finding common ground. They agreed that public discussions had become more polarized. They agreed that respectful disagreement was becoming increasingly rare. And they agreed that people often made assumptions without knowing the full story. The conversation became one of the most thoughtful segments. The show had aired in months. Near the end of the interview, the host turned toward Carrie with a smile. "You know, I still don't agree with everything you've said tonight." The audience laughed. Carrie smiled back. "That's okay. It would be a pretty boring world if everyone agreed on everything." The crowd erupted into applause. The host nodded. "I can definitely agree with that." They shook hands as the audience stood for a standing ovation. The energy inside the studio completely changed. What had initially appeared to be an explosive clash ended as a respectful exchange of ideas. After the cameras stopped rolling, audience members continued discussing the conversation among themselves. Some supported Carrie's views. Others agreed more with the host's perspective. But nearly everyone appreciated the fact that both participants remained respectful, despite their disagreement. By the next morning, clips from the interview had spread rapidly across social media platforms. Viewers debated the discussion, shared their favorite moments, and praised the thoughtful nature of the exchange. Many headlines focused on the dramatic tension that had emerged during the broadcast. Others highlighted Carrie's calm confidence under pressure. Yet the most important takeaway wasn't the disagreement itself. It was the way both sides handled it. Instead of turning a difference of opinion into a personal conflict, they demonstrated that meaningful conversations can still happen when people listen carefully, speak honestly, and treat each other with respect. Long after the studio lights dimmed and the audience returned home, the conversation continued inspiring discussions online. It reminded viewers that disagreement does not have to create division. Sometimes the most memorable television moments aren't created by shouting matches or scandals. Sometimes they happen when two people challenge each other's ideas, remain respectful, and leave the stage with greater understanding than when they arrived. And that was exactly why this unforgettable late-night encounter remained in people's minds long after the show ended.